The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with the usual mixture of languages, clicking sounds, and electronic translations. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly in the human delegation's corner, watching as the various alien species discussed matters that apparently didn't concern Earth. Again. The trade routes through the Vega sector need additional protection, announced Councillor Vexter, his reptilian features gleaming under the chamber's artificial lighting. The Zephyrian delegate's voice carried the authority of a species that controlled 12 star systems. The Draconian raids have increased by 30% this cycle. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The Draconians had been a growing threat for the past 5 years, their black ships appearing without warning to strike at merchant vessels and mining operations. No one knew where they came from, and no one had successfully tracked them back to their home base. Perhaps the mighty Earth fleet could assist. The suggestion came from Delegate K.R. Rarshaw, an insectoid being whose species controlled the crystal mines of Proxima. The sarcasm in his translated voice was unmistakable, and several other delegates made sounds that Sarah had learned to recognize as alien laughter. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt the familiar burn of frustration. Earth had been part of the Galactic Council for 15 years now, ever since first contact had been established. In all that time, they had been treated as the galactic equivalent of a developing nation, useful for raw materials and manual labor, but certainly not capable of contributing to serious military or technological endeavors. The human vessels are adequate for local system patrol, Councillor Vexter said with the kind of diplomatic politeness that was actually an insult. However, this situation requires ships capable of faster-than-light pursuit and advanced tactical systems. Admiral Rebecca Torres, sitting beside Sarah, shifted slightly in her chair. Sarah could see the tension in the older woman's shoulders. Torres had commanded the Earth Defense Fleet for 8 years and had repeatedly requested permission to contribute to anti-piracy operations. Each time, the request had been politely declined. "Our ships may surprise you," Torres said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the chamber's acoustics. "Earth's technology has advanced considerably since we joined the Council." "Of course it has," Delegate K.R. Rarshaw replied, his mandibles clicking in what Sarah knew was amusement. 15 whole years of progress, how remarkable. More alien laughter filled the chamber. Sarah watched as Tor's jaw tightened, but the Admiral maintained her composure. It was always the same. Earth's relatively recent entry into galactic civilization made them the subject of constant condescension. The fact that humans had developed space travel independently seemed to matter less than the fact that they had done it thousands of years after everyone else. "The Draconians struck again yesterday," announced a new voice. Commodore Thane of the Altarian Navy stepped forward, his blue-skinned features grave. "They hit a research station in the Kepler system, 37 dead, including 12 civilians." The chamber fell silent. The Altarians were generally considered the most advanced military force in the galaxy, with their silver ships and quantum weaponry. If they were concerned about the Draconian threat, everyone else should be worried. "Do we have any intelligence on their attack patterns?" asked Councillor Vexter. "Nothing useful," Thane replied. "They appear, strike fast, and vanish. Our fastest pursuit ships can't even get close to tracking them. It's as if they simply disappear into empty space." "Perhaps they have some form of advanced cloaking technology," suggested the Centaurian delegate, her melodic voice carrying a note of worry. "Or dimensional phase shifting." "We've considered all possibilities," Thane said. "Our scientists have analyzed every scrap of debris, every energy signature. The Draconians seem to possess technology that defies our current understanding of physics." Sarah exchanged a glance with Torres. The Admiral raised an eyebrow slightly, a gesture so small that only someone who knew her well would notice it. Sarah had worked with Torres long enough to recognize that look. The Admiral was thinking about something, and Sarah had a feeling she knew what it was. "What about their ship configurations?" Torres asked. "Have you been able to determine anything about their tactical doctrine?" Thane looked surprised that the human Admiral had spoken. "They favor fast attack formations, usually 3 to 5 ships operating in tight coordination. They target specific objectives, communication arrays, weapon systems, life support. They're not just pirates looking for cargo. They're military units with specific mission parameters." "Interesting," Torres murmured. "You have thoughts on this matter, Admiral?" Councillor Vexter asked. his tone suggesting mild curiosity rather than genuine interest. Tors stood up slowly. At 55, she still carried herself with the bearing of the fighter pilot she had once been. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was immaculate. "I've been studying the attack reports," she said. "There are patterns that suggest these aren't random raids." "The Altarian military has already conducted extensive analysis," Delegate K.R.R. Shaw interjected. "I hardly think human observations would add anything significant." "With respect," Tors continued, "I've spent 30 years studying asymmetric warfare. Before joining the Space Service, I commanded special operations units in Earth's final continental conflicts. The Draconian attack patterns remind me of something we used to call reconnaissance in force." "Meaning what exactly?" Thane asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity despite his earlier dismissiveness. "They're not just raiding," Tors explained. "They're testing. Each attack is designed to probe your response times, your tactical coordination, your technological capabilities. They're gathering intelligence for something bigger." The chamber fell quiet. Sarah could see various delegates exchanging glances. It was a sobering thought, the idea that the Draconian raids weren't the main threat, but merely preparation for something worse. "That's a disturbing theory," Counselor Vexter said slowly. "But even if you're correct, what can be done? Our combined fleets have been unable to locate their base of operations." "You've been looking in the wrong places," Tors said. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the sudden tension in the room. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in indignation. "Are you suggesting that the military commands of 7 different species have all been incompetent?" Delegate K.R.R. Shaw's voice carried a dangerous edge. Tors remained calm. "I'm suggesting that you've been thinking like spacefaring civilizations. The Draconians aren't operating from a traditional base. If they were, you would have found them by now. Your technology is too advanced, your sensor network's too comprehensive." "Then where are they operating from?" Thane demanded. Tors smiled slightly. "Somewhere you haven't thought to look because it goes against everything you know about proper military doctrine." Before anyone could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the chamber. The massive display screens around the room flickered to life, showing tactical readouts and communication channels. A voice spoke over the intercom system, first in Galactic Standard, then in various species languages. "Emergency alert. Draconian forces have launched simultaneous attacks on 17 different systems. This appears to be a coordinated assault on critical infrastructure targets. All military units are ordered to respond immediately." The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates were shouting orders into communication devices, calling for their fleets to mobilize. The screens showed a galaxy-spanning map with red indicators appearing across multiple sectors. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing dread. The attacks were happening too fast, across too wide an area. It was impossible for any single fleet to respond to all of them simultaneously. "They're splitting our forces," Tors observed quietly, her voice cutting through the noise. "Classic divide and conquer. While we're scrambling to protect 17 different targets, their real objective is somewhere else entirely." "Then where?" Thane spun around to face her, his earlier skepticism replaced by urgent concern. Tors studied the tactical display for a moment, her eyes tracking the pattern of attacks. "They're hitting communication relays and sensor stations. They want to create blind spots in your surveillance network." "For what purpose?" "To hide their approach to the real target." Tors pointed at the display. "Look at the pattern. Every attack is on the outer edges of inhabited space. They're creating a corridor of sensor blackouts leading." Her voice trailed off as she traced the pattern with her finger. Sarah followed the gesture and felt her blood run cold. The corridor of attacks led directly toward the galactic core, toward the sector containing Earth and the other founding members of the Galactic Council. "They're coming here," Tor said grimly. "This isn't just a raid, it's an invasion." The chamber fell silent except for the continuing alarm signals. The magnitude of what Tors was suggesting began to sink in. If she was right, then everything the galaxy had assumed about the Draconian threat was wrong. They weren't just pirates or raiders, they were an organized military force preparing for conquest. "How long before they reach the core systems?" Counselor Vexter asked, his earlier condescension completely gone. Tors studied the tactical display, running calculations in her head. Based on the timing of these attacks and the projected course, 18 hours, maybe less. Our fleets are scattered, Thane said, his voice hollow. Even if we recall all units immediately, we can't possibly assemble a defensive force in time. What about Earth's fleet? Sarah found herself asking. Where are our ships positioned? Tors turned to her with a look that might have been pride. The entire Earth Defense Fleet is currently conducting training exercises in the Sol system. All 47 ships are present and accounted for. 47 ships against an invasion force. Delegate K.R.R. Shaw made that clicking sound again, but this time it sounded more like nervousness than amusement. That's barely a squadron by galactic standards. It's what we have, Sarah replied firmly. And unlike every other fleet in the galaxy, ours isn't scattered across 17 different systems trying to respond to diversionary attacks. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the chamber. For years, Earth had been marginalized specifically because their fleet was considered too small and primitive to matter. Now, that same small fleet might be the only force positioned to defend the galactic core. Even so, Counselor Vexter said carefully, 47 ships cannot stand against an armada. The Draconians must have hundreds of vessels to coordinate attacks across so many systems simultaneously. Tors was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Maybe they don't need to stand against the entire armada. Maybe they just need to do what Earth forces do best. Which is what? Thane asked. Improvise, Sarah answered for her. Earth's military doctrine has always been built around the assumption that we'd be outnumbered and outgunned. We've gotten very good at finding unconventional solutions. This isn't a theoretical exercise, Delegate K.R.R. Shaw protested. This is the defense of galactic civilization. We need proven military strategies, not human improvisation. Tors turned to face him directly. Your proven military strategies are exactly what the Draconians have been studying for the past 5 years. They know how you think, how you respond, how you deploy your forces. They've planned this entire operation around your predictability. Are you suggesting we should trust Earth to defend the galaxy? The question came from the Centaurian delegate, her melodic voice tinged with disbelief. I'm suggesting you don't have any other choice, Tors replied bluntly. Every other fleet is exactly where the Draconians wanted them to be. Earth's fleet is the only variable they couldn't account for because nobody, including most of you, takes it seriously. Sarah felt a mixture of anger and determination rising in her chest. For 15 years, Earth had been treated as a junior partner, constantly reminded of their technological limitations and military inexperience. Now, when the galaxy faced its greatest threat, those same limitations might be their greatest advantage. What are you proposing? Counselor Vexter asked. Tors straightened to her full height. Give me operational command of the defense. Let Earth's fleet engage the Draconian force using our own tactical doctrine. We can't match their numbers or their technology, but we can do something they won't expect. Which is? Tors smiled grimly. We can lose in a way that costs them everything. The statement sent a chill through the chamber. Sarah understood what Tors was suggesting, a defensive strategy so unconventional, so contrary to standard military wisdom, that even she wasn't entirely sure it would work. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, are you talking about what I think you're talking about? Tors nodded slowly. The Kazakhstan Gambit, adapted for space warfare. Several delegates began demanding explanations, but Tors held up a hand for silence. There's no time to explain the details. The decision has to be made now. Either you trust Earth's fleet to defend the galaxy, or you evacuate the core systems and hope the scattered forces can eventually regroup. The chamber erupted into heated discussion as delegates frantically consulted with their home governments. Sarah watched the tactical display, noting how the red indicators continued to spread across the galaxy. The Draconian attacks were proceeding exactly as Tors had predicted, creating a widening corridor of sensor blackouts. The attacks on the outer systems are intensifying, Thane reported, studying incoming data streams. They're not just hitting infrastructure anymore, they're destroying entire defense platforms. They're making sure nobody can follow them, Tors observed. Once they pass through each system, they're sealing it behind them, very thorough. Admiral Tors, Counselor Vexter said formally, The Council is prepared to grant you tactical command of the core system defense. However, we need some assurance that your strategy has a reasonable chance of success." Tors was quiet for a moment. "I can't guarantee success," she said finally. "What I can guarantee is that if we do this right, the Draconians will pay such a high price for their victory that they'll never be able to mount another offensive of this scale. And if we do it wrong, then the galaxy falls today instead of tomorrow." The brutal honesty of the statement seemed to resonate with the assembled delegates. One by one, they began signaling their agreement to Tor's command authority. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Earth was finally being given the chance to prove itself on the galactic stage, but the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. "How long until the Draconian force reaches the core systems?" Tors asked Thane. 15 hours based on current projections." Tors nodded grimly. "Then we have 15 hours to prepare the most important military operation in human history." She turned to Sarah. "Ambassador, I need you to coordinate with the civilian authorities. If this goes wrong, evacuation procedures need to be in place." "And if it goes right?" Tors managed a slight smile. "If it goes right, then maybe the galaxy will finally understand what humans are really capable of when they're properly motivated." As alarms continued to wail and delegates rushed to coordinate with their home fleets, Sarah found herself thinking about Earth's long journey from a single planet to a galactic power. They had always been the underdogs, the newcomers trying to prove themselves worthy of respect. Now, for the first time, the fate of the galaxy might actually rest in human hands. The irony was almost overwhelming. After years of being dismissed as technologically primitive and militarily inexperienced, Earth's fleet was about to face the greatest threat in galactic history. Sarah just hoped that Tor's confidence was justified, because if the Admiral was wrong, there might not be a galaxy left to defend. The bridge of the EDS Unconquerable was unlike any warship command center in the galaxy. Where other species favored sleek, curved designs with holographic displays floating in midair, the human vessel retained the angular, functional aesthetic that had characterized Earth's military for generations. Physical screens lined the walls, backup systems were visible and accessible, and every critical function had at least 2 manual override options. Admiral Rebecca Tors stood in the center of it all, watching as her fleet prepared for what might be the last battle any of them would ever fight. Through the main view screen, she could see the other ships of Earth's defense fleet arranging themselves in formations that would have seemed completely wrong to any galactic military observer. "Admiral, we're receiving confused signals from the Altarian and Zephyrian fleets," reported Communications Officer Lisa Park. "They're asking why we're positioning our ships in defensive clusters around the asteroid mining stations instead of forming a battle line." Tors smiled grimly. "Tell them we're implementing a distributed defense strategy. They'll understand soon enough." Captain Marcus Webb, Tors' longtime friend and the Unconquerable's commanding officer, moved to stand beside her. "Are you sure about this, Becca? We're about to stake everything on a strategy that's never been tested in space combat." "The Kazakhstan Gambit worked on Earth because it exploited our enemy's assumptions about how we would fight," Tors replied. "The Draconians have spent years studying galactic military doctrine. They know exactly how every other species deploys their forces, exactly how they respond to threats. But they've never paid attention to human military history because everyone assumed it was irrelevant." Through the view screen, Tors could see the 47 ships of Earth's fleet taking positions that defied conventional space warfare tactics. Instead of forming the massive battle lines favored by galactic powers, the human vessels were scattered across a wide area, positioned near asteroids, mining platforms, and other seemingly random locations. "Admiral," called out Tactical Officer Commander Sarah Kim, "long-range sensors are detecting the Draconian force. They're emerging from the sensor blackout zones exactly where you predicted." Tors moved to the tactical station, studying the sensor readings with practiced eyes. "How many ships?" "Initial count shows at least 300 vessels. They're arranged in standard assault formation, heavy cruisers in the center, fast attack ships on the flanks, support vessels in the rear." 300 ships, Webb muttered. "Against our 47, those are some impressive odds." "The odds are exactly what we need them to be," Tors replied. "If this was going to be a fair fight, the Draconians wouldn't have bothered with all the elaborate misdirection. They're expecting to face scattered resistance from confused and disorganized defenders. Instead, they're getting what exactly? Kim asked. A porcupine, Tors said simply. The bridge crew exchanged glances, but nobody asked for clarification. Tors had a reputation for using unusual metaphors that made perfect sense in retrospect. For now, they would trust her judgment and execute their orders precisely. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the lead Draconian vessel, Park announced. Put it through. The main screen flickered, showing the image of a massive reptilian creature with scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When it spoke, its voice was like gravel grinding against metal, even through the universal translator. I am War Commander Thakmer of the Draconian Empire. You have 47 primitive vessels positioned against my 300 ships. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Tors stepped forward, clasping her hands behind her back in a gesture that every human in the fleet would recognize as her preparing for battle. This is Admiral Rebecca Tors of Earth's Defense Fleet. Your invasion ends here. Thakmer's reptilian features twisted into what might have been amusement. Earth's Defense Fleet, the galaxy's toy soldiers. I had hoped to face worthy opponents in this historic conquest. You have no idea how worthy we are, Tors replied calmly, but you're about to find out. Admiral, the Draconian commander said, his voice taking on a mocking tone, I have studied the military capabilities of every species in this galaxy. Your ships are slower than Zephyrian cruisers, less heavily armed than Altarian battleships, and lack the advanced shielding of Centaurian vessels. What exactly do you think 47 obsolete ships can accomplish against my armada? Tors smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. We're going to teach you why human military doctrine survived 10,000 years of continuous warfare on a single planet before we ever reached the stars. The transmission cut off, and Tors turned back to her crew. All ships implement Protocol 7, commence Operation Porcupine. Across the fleet, human commanders who had drilled this scenario hundreds of times in simulation began executing orders that would have seemed like madness to any galactic military observer. Instead of advancing to meet the enemy or forming defensive lines, the Earth ships began moving toward the asteroids and mining platforms they had positioned themselves near. The Draconians are advancing, Kim reported. Standard formation, but they're moving cautiously. I think our positioning has them confused. Good, Tors said. Confusion is the first step toward defeat. Through the view screen, she watched as the Draconian Armada approached the outer edge of the asteroid field. The formation was textbook perfect, exactly what she would have expected from a military force that had studied galactic warfare for years. Heavy ships in the center to absorb damage, fast ships on the flanks to exploit weaknesses, support vessels safely in the rear. It was also exactly the formation that would be most vulnerable to what Earth's fleet was about to do. Admiral, the mining platforms are reporting ready, Park announced. Tors nodded. The mining platforms, scattered throughout the asteroid field, weren't actually mining anything. Over the past several hours, Earth engineers had been busy converting them into something that had never been seen in galactic warfare before: massive improvised weapons platforms disguised as civilian infrastructure. Enemy fleet is entering the outer perimeter, Kim called out. Range to lead ships is 200,000 kilometers and closing. Wait for it, Tors said quietly. The Draconian formation continued its advance, confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority. 300 ships against 47 was such a lopsided engagement that War Commander Thakmer was probably already planning his victory speech. Enemy ships are beginning to spread out, Kim reported. They're trying to encircle our positions. Perfect, Tors said. They're doing exactly what we want them to do. Captain Webb moved closer to Tors. Becca, the outer ships are almost within weapons range of our forward positions, if we don't act soon. Range to lead enemy ships is now 50,000 kilometers, Kim announced. Tors watched the tactical display with the patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect shot. Everything depended on timing. Too early, and the Draconians would have time to adapt their strategy. Too late, and Earth's fleet would be overwhelmed before their plan could unfold. Enemy fleet is now spread across a front of 800,000 kilometers, Kim continued. They've committed to the encirclement maneuver. Tors smiled. Now they can't retreat without losing formation cohesion. All ships execute Phase 1. Across the battlefield, something happened that had never been seen in galactic warfare before. The human ships didn't advance toward the enemy or retreat to defensive positions. Instead, they simply vanished. "What the hell?" Webb muttered, staring at the tactical display where 47 human ships had suddenly disappeared from sensors. "Stealth systems are holding," Kim reported with satisfaction. "The Draconians have lost lock on all our vessels." Tors watched as the enemy formation began to show signs of confusion. Draconian ships were scanning frantically, trying to relocate targets that had simply vanished from their sensors. The beautiful precision of their advance formation started to break down as individual commanders tried to compensate for the loss of their targets. "How long can we maintain stealth?" Webb asked. "Long enough," Tors replied. "Our ships aren't actually invisible, they're just hiding where the enemy isn't looking." The truth was both simpler and more complex than advanced cloaking technology. Earth ships were using the asteroids and mining platforms as cover, positioning themselves in sensor shadows, and using the natural background radiation of the field to mask their signatures. It was a technique that required precise maneuvering and intimate knowledge of sensor technology, but it didn't rely on exotic physics or advanced alien science. "The Draconians are adapting," Kim reported. "They're beginning to scan the asteroids directly." "Expected," Tor said calmly. "Phase 2 all ships." Now the real battle began. Earth vessels emerged from concealment not where the Draconians expected to find them, but where they had positioned themselves to do maximum damage. Human ships appeared behind Draconian formations, above and below their defensive screens, in gaps between their formations that the enemy hadn't even realized existed. But the human ships weren't trying to engage in traditional ship-to-ship combat. Instead, they were targeting something the Draconians hadn't considered: the mining platforms that had been scattered throughout the asteroid field. "All platforms armed and ready," Park reported. "Fire," Tors ordered. The mining platforms that the Draconians had dismissed as irrelevant infrastructure suddenly revealed their true nature. Each platform unleashed a barrage of kinetic projectiles, not sophisticated energy weapons, but simple chunks of metal accelerated to incredible velocities by electromagnetic launchers. In the vacuum of space, with no atmosphere to slow them down, these projectiles became devastating weapons. The Draconians had been so focused on the threat from Earth ships that they had ignored the possibility that the humans had turned the entire battlefield into a weapons platform. "Direct hits on 17 enemy vessels," Kim announced with grim satisfaction. "The lead heavy cruiser is venting atmosphere, and 2 of their fast attack ships have lost power." The Draconian formation, so precisely arranged for traditional space combat, suddenly found itself under attack from directions that shouldn't have been possible. The enemy commander's careful battle plan, based on superior numbers and firepower, was falling apart because the humans weren't fighting the kind of battle he expected. "They're trying to regroup," Kim reported. "The Draconian commander is pulling his ships back to reorganize." "Not going to happen," Tors said. "Phase 3 all ships." Now Earth's vessels revealed the true genius of their positioning. They had been placed not just to launch surprise attacks, but to control the Draconians' escape routes. Every path the enemy might use to withdraw from the asteroid field was covered by human ships that could emerge from concealment to block their retreat. "Enemy ships are trapped," Webb observed with amazement. "They can't advance without exposing themselves to the platform weapons, and they can't retreat without running into our ships." "That's the point," Tors explained. "The Kazakhstan gambit isn't about winning a straight fight. It's about forcing the enemy to fight on ground of your choosing, under conditions that neutralize their advantages." Through the view screen, she could see Draconian ships trying desperately to break free from the trap they had flown into. War Commander Thakmer's 300 ships were technically still superior to Earth's 47 vessels, but superiority meant nothing when you couldn't bring your weapons to bear effectively. "Admiral, we're receiving another transmission from the Draconian commander," Park announced. "Put him through." Thakmer's reptilian features filled the screen again, but this time his expression was one of fury rather than amusement. "What trickery is this? You fight without honor, hiding behind rocks and civilian platforms." "I fight to win," Tors replied calmly. Honor is a luxury we can't afford when we're protecting our homes. Your primitive tactics will not save you, Thakmer snarled. I still have 3 times your numbers. When my ships break free from this trap, your fleet will be annihilated. Your ships aren't going to break free, Tors said with quiet confidence. Because you're thinking like a traditional fleet commander, and this isn't a traditional battle. She gestured to the tactical display, where Draconian ships were clearly visible struggling against the constraints of the battlefield Earth had created. You came here expecting to fight the kind of war you've been studying for 5 years. Ship against ship, formation against formation, technology against technology. But that's not the war we're offering. Then what kind of war is this? Thakmer demanded. Tors smiled coldly. This is the kind of war humans learned to fight when we spent 10 millennia trying to kill each other on a single planet. It's the kind of war where smaller forces beat larger ones through preparation, positioning, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. You studied galactic military doctrine, War Commander, but you never studied human military history. That was a mistake. The transmission cut off again, and Tors turned back to her tactical display. The Draconian formation was beginning to show serious signs of strain. Ships that had been damaged by the platform weapons were falling behind, creating gaps in their formations. Commanders were making increasingly desperate attempts to break free from the asteroid field, only to find human ships waiting in ambush at every possible exit point. Enemy casualties are mounting, Kim reported. We count 23 ships with serious damage and at least 7 that appear to be completely disabled. Our casualties? Tors asked. 3 ships with minor damage, no losses. Webb whistled softly. Against 300 ships, and we haven't lost anyone yet. Don't get overconfident, Tors warned. Thakmer is a capable commander. He'll adapt to our tactics eventually. As if summoned by her words, the tactical display began showing new movement patterns from the Draconian fleet. Instead of trying to maintain formation integrity, the enemy ships were beginning to operate in smaller, more independent groups. They're breaking up into hunter-killer squads, Kim observed. Looks like they're going to try to hunt down our ships individually. Smart, Tors admitted. If they can force us into individual ship duels, their superior firepower will start to matter. So what do we do? Webb asked. Tors studied the display for a long moment, watching as Draconian ships began to spread throughout the asteroid field in smaller groups. The enemy commander had learned from his initial mistakes and was adapting his strategy to counter Earth's advantages. We give them what they want, she said finally. All ships implement Phase 4, begin individual engagement protocols. Admiral, Kim said with concern, our ships can't match Draconian vessels in single combat. Their shields and weapons are superior to ours. They are, Tors agreed, but they're about to learn the difference between superior technology and superior tactics. She activated the fleet communication channel, her voice carrying to every human ship in the battle zone. All vessels, this is Admiral Tors. The enemy has adapted to our initial strategy and is now hunting us individually. That's exactly what we want them to do. She paused, looking around the bridge at her crew. For the past 15 years, we've been told that our ships are obsolete, our weapons primitive, our tactics outdated. Today, we prove that the most important weapon in any arsenal is the mind of the person using it. Through the view screen, she could see Draconian hunting groups moving through the asteroid field, seeking to engage individual human ships in combat. What they didn't realize was that they were about to encounter something no other species in the galaxy had ever developed: human ingenuity applied to the art of war. Remember, Tors continued over the comm channel, we're not trying to win fair fights. We're trying to win, period. Use everything, the asteroids, the platforms, the enemy's expectations against them. Make them fight our kind of war. As the first engagements began throughout the asteroid field, Tors watched the tactical display with the calm satisfaction of a strategist whose plan was unfolding exactly as intended. The Draconians had superior ships and superior weapons, but they were about to discover that, in war, superiority meant nothing if you couldn't use it effectively. The real battle was just beginning. Captain Alina Vasquez of the EDS Phoenix watched through her ship's view screen as 3 Draconian hunters approached her position. The enemy vessels were sleek, predatory-looking ships with weapons that could probably punch through her shields with a single sustained burst. In any fair fight, the Phoenix wouldn't stand a chance. Fortunately, Vasquez had no intention of fighting fair. "Captain, enemy ships are closing to weapons range," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Chen. "They're spreading out to prevent us from escaping." "Let them come," Vasquez replied calmly. She had positioned the Phoenix near a cluster of particularly large asteroids, seemingly trapped with nowhere to run. To the approaching Draconians, it probably looked like they had cornered a helpless prey. They were about to learn otherwise. "Enemy ships are powering weapons," Chen announced. "Range is 30,000 kilometers and closing." Vasquez waited, watching the tactical display as the three Draconian ships moved into what they thought was an optimal attack formation. The lead ship was directly ahead, while the other two had spread out to cover possible escape routes. It was textbook small unit tactics, exactly what she had hoped they would do. "All stop," she ordered. "Power down engines and drift." "Captain," Chen looked confused. "They'll interpret that as surrender." "No, they'll interpret it as mechanical failure," Vasquez corrected. "There's a difference." On the tactical display, she could see the Draconian ships slowing their approach. The lead vessel was scanning the Phoenix intensively, trying to determine why the human ship had suddenly stopped moving. "They're hailing us," reported Communications Officer Park. "Put them through." The screen flickered to show a Draconian commander whose scales were marked with what Vasquez recognized as rank insignia. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of a predator that had cornered its prey. "Human vessel, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Vasquez replied. "We're experiencing complete engine failure. We can't surrender even if we wanted to." The Draconian commander's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You will prepare to be boarded." "We'll prepare for whatever you want," Vasquez said agreeably. "But I should warn you, our ship has been armed with some experimental human technology. Very unstable stuff. If you damage the wrong systems during your approach, we might all have a problem." She could see the uncertainty in the Draconians' expression. Like most galactic species, the Draconians had learned to be wary of human claims about experimental technology. Earth's reputation for dangerous improvisation was well established, even if most aliens didn't take human military capabilities seriously. "What kind of experimental technology?" the commander demanded. Vasquez shrugged. "The kind that makes very large explosions when it's disturbed. Our engineers were trying to develop something called a stellar resonance amplifier. Personally, I think they were just trying to find new ways to blow things up, but what do I know? I'm just a ship captain." The transmission cut off, and Vasquez watched as the three Draconian ships held position, their commanders apparently discussing their options. She could imagine the conversation. Was the human telling the truth about unstable technology, or was this some kind of trap? "Captain," Chen said quietly, "they're scanning us very intensively. If they detect that we're lying about the engine failure." "They won't," Vasquez replied confidently. "Because we're not lying, our engines really are shut down." Chen looked confused, but before he could ask for clarification, the tactical display showed the Draconian ships moving again. This time, they were approaching much more cautiously, clearly worried about the possibility of setting off whatever experimental technology the Phoenix might be carrying. "Distance to lead ship is 10,000 kilometers, Chen reported. "They're moving very slowly." "Perfect," Vasquez said. She activated her comm system, broadcasting on a frequency that all three Draconian ships would be monitoring. "Attention, Draconian vessels. I'm transmitting the technical specifications for our experimental technology. Please review them carefully before proceeding with your approach." She nodded to Chen, who began transmitting a data package that had been prepared specifically for this kind of situation. The technical specifications were completely authentic. They really did describe an experimental human technology. What they didn't mention was that the technology in question had nothing to do with stellar resonance amplification. "They've received the data package," Park reported. "All three ships have stopped to analyze it." Vasquez watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Draconian commanders were now studying detailed technical specifications for something called a quantum entanglement mine. The specifications were accurate, describing a weapon that could theoretically create a localized space-time distortion when triggered. What the specifications didn't make clear was that the quantum entanglement mines weren't experimental at all. They were standard equipment on every ship in Earth's fleet. More importantly, they weren't carried inside the ships where they might be accidentally triggered. They were deployed outside, where they could be strategically positioned without endangering the ships that had launched them. Captain, the Draconians are requesting additional information about the safe approach distance for their boarding operation, Park said. Tell them that our technical manuals recommend a minimum distance of 5 kilometers for any ship without proper shielding, Vasquez replied. And emphasize that we're not responsible for any unfortunate accidents that might occur if they ignore our safety recommendations. She was counting on the Draconians' unfamiliarity with human military doctrine. Every other species in the galaxy favored direct, straightforward tactics. The idea of hiding weapons in technical safety manuals would never occur to them. All 3 ships are maintaining distance while they study our technical data, Chen reported. They seem to be taking our warnings very seriously. Good, Vasquez said. That gives us time to implement the next phase. She activated the ship's internal communication system. All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for emergency decompression in 30 seconds. All personnel to emergency stations. Throughout the ship, the crew began implementing procedures they had drilled countless times. Emergency bulkheads sealed, pressure suits were activated, and everyone moved to positions where they could survive the sudden loss of atmospheric pressure. Captain, are you planning to vent our atmosphere? Chen asked with concern. I'm planning to make our ship look like it's been catastrophically damaged, Vasquez corrected. There's a difference. She counted down the seconds, then activated the atmospheric venting system. Gas began streaming from specially designed ports all over the Phoenix's hull, creating the visual impression of a ship that had suffered massive internal damage. Emergency distress signal activated, Park reported. We're broadcasting a general mayday indicating catastrophic system failure and imminent core breach. Through the view screen, Vasquez could see the effect her performance was having on the Draconian ships. The 3 vessels had moved even further away, clearly spooked by the sight of the apparently crippled human vessel venting atmosphere and broadcasting emergency signals. They're requesting instructions from their fleet command, Park continued. I think they're not sure whether to retreat or try to help us. Let's give them something to really think about, Vasquez said. She activated another system that every human ship carried but that no other species knew about. A gravitometric distortion generator originally designed for asteroid mining operations. The device created localized gravity fluctuations that served no military purpose in traditional space combat. But when used creatively, it could produce sensor readings that looked very much like the precursor effects of an imminent antimatter containment failure. Captain, Chen said with alarm, our sensors are detecting massive energy buildup throughout the ship. It looks like we're about to explode. Exactly, Vasquez said with satisfaction, and so do theirs. On the tactical display, she could see the 3 Draconian ships beginning to retreat rapidly. The combination of venting atmosphere, emergency broadcasts, and gravitometric anomalies had convinced them that the Phoenix was indeed about to suffer a catastrophic explosion. Distance to enemy ships is increasing, Chen reported. They're moving to what they probably think is safe range. How far, Vasquez asked. 15 kilometers and still increasing. Perfect, Vasquez smiled as she activated the final phase of her plan. Fire quantum entanglement mines. The Phoenix hadn't been carrying experimental weapons that might accidentally explode. Instead, it had been quietly deploying very real weapons that were specifically designed to explode at exactly the right moment. While the Draconians had been studying technical manuals and worrying about fictional stellar resonance amplifiers, the human ship had been seeding the surrounding space with actual military ordnance. The quantum entanglement mines had been positioned during the Phoenix's initial approach to the asteroid cluster. They were small, nearly undetectable, and programmed to activate when specific conditions were met. Those conditions had just been satisfied by the positions of the 3 Draconian ships. Space around the enemy vessels suddenly erupted in brilliant flashes of light as the mines detonated simultaneously. The weapons didn't rely on explosive force. Instead, They created localized distortions in spacetime that wreaked havoc on anything within their effective radius. All three enemy ships are showing massive system failures, Chen reported with amazement. Their shields are down, weapons are offline, and their engines appear to be completely disabled. Excellent, Vasquez said. She reactivated the Phoenix's engines and began moving toward the crippled Draconian vessels. Now we collect our prisoners and move on to the next target. Similar scenes were playing out throughout the asteroid field as other human captains implemented their own variations of unconventional tactics. Each engagement was different, tailored to the specific circumstances and the creativity of the individual commanders, but they all shared the same fundamental approach: use the enemy's expectations against them. Captain Rodriguez of the EDS Defiant had convinced a group of Draconian hunters that his ship was actually a mobile research station, conducting dangerous experiments on gravitational anomalies. The enemy had maintained a respectful distance while trying to scan the research equipment, never realizing that they were being systematically surrounded by cloaked human fighters. Commander Thompson of the EDS Relentless had used his ship's industrial fabrication systems to create what appeared to be massive debris from a destroyed human vessel. The Draconians had approached to investigate what they thought was the wreckage of an enemy ship, only to discover that the debris was actually camouflaged weapon platforms. Throughout the battlefield, human commanders were proving that technological superiority meant nothing without tactical flexibility. The Draconians had better ships, better weapons, and better shields, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to engage them on their own terms. "Captain," Park announced, "we're receiving a communication from Admiral Torres." "Put her through." Torres' image appeared on the screen, and Vasquez could see the satisfaction in the Admiral's expression. "Outstanding work, Captain. How many enemy ships did you disable?" "3 ships captured, crews detained for interrogation," Vasquez reported. "No damage to the Phoenix, no casualties among our crew." "Excellent. Similar reports are coming in from across the fleet. We've disabled or captured over 60 Draconian vessels without suffering a single loss." Vasquez felt a surge of pride. Earth's fleet was not only holding its own against a vastly superior force, it was winning decisively using tactics that no other species would have considered. "What are your orders, Admiral?" she asked. "Regroup with the main fleet. Our unconventional tactics have been effective, but War Commander Thakmer is adapting his strategy. The next phase is going to be more difficult." As the transmission ended, Vasquez looked at the tactical display showing the broader battle. Human ships throughout the asteroid field were reporting similar successes, but she could see that the Draconian force was beginning to reorganize. The enemy commander had learned from his initial defeats and was implementing new tactics designed to counter human unconventional warfare. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from the main Draconian fleet," Chen reported. "It looks like they're powering up some kind of heavy weapon." Vasquez felt a chill of apprehension. Earth's tactics had been successful because they relied on the enemy's unfamiliarity with human military doctrine. But if War Commander Thakmer was willing to abandon conventional tactics entirely, he might have options that could neutralize human advantages. "Set course for the fleet rendezvous point," she ordered. "Maximum speed." As the Phoenix accelerated toward its assigned position, Vasquez found herself wondering what Admiral Torres had planned for the next phase of the battle. The human fleet had won the opening engagements through superior tactics and creative improvisation, but the Draconians still had overwhelming numerical superiority. More importantly, they were clearly capable of learning from their mistakes. The next phase of the battle would test whether human ingenuity could continue to overcome alien technology and superior numbers. Through the view screen, she could see other human ships converging on the rendezvous point, all of them having successfully completed their individual missions. For the first time in galactic history, a human fleet had decisively defeated alien forces in space combat. But as Vasquez watched the reorganizing Draconian Armada, she knew that the real test was still to come. War Commander Thakmer stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Render, staring at tactical displays that showed a situation he had never imagined possible. In less than 3 hours, his invasion force had been reduced from 300 ships to barely 200 effective vessels. The humans had captured or disabled over 100 of his finest warships without losing a single vessel of their own. How, he demanded of his tactical advisor, a scarred veteran named Crester who had served in dozens of successful campaigns. How have 47 primitive ships defeated a third of our armada? Crester's scales rippled with what Thakmer recognized as deep unease. War Commander, these humans do not fight like any species we have encountered. They use deception, misdirection, and tactics that violate every principle of honorable warfare. Honor is irrelevant, Thakmer snarled. Victory is what matters, and right now we are losing to a species that the galaxy considers barely capable of defending their own system. He turned to study the tactical display, trying to understand how his carefully planned invasion had gone so wrong. The humans had somehow turned the entire battlefield into a trap, using weapons and tactics that defied conventional military wisdom. "What is the status of our captured ships?" he asked. "All crews have been taken prisoner," Crester reported grimly. "The humans are holding them on converted mining platforms throughout the asteroid field. Our ships have been stripped of all weapons and useful technology." Thakmer's claws extended involuntarily. The idea of Draconian warriors being held prisoner by humans was almost unthinkable. His species had conquered dozens of worlds through superior military technology and ruthless efficiency. To be defeated by what the galaxy considered primitive barbarians was beyond humiliating. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet," announced his communications officer. "The humans want to negotiate?" Thakmer asked with surprise. "Unknown, sir. The transmission is coming from their flagship." Thakmer straightened to his full imposing height. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to show the image of Admiral Tors standing on what was clearly a human warship's bridge. Behind her, Thakmer could see the angular, functional design that characterized human military architecture. It looked primitive compared to the sleek curves and holographic displays of Draconian vessels, but there was something undeniably effective about its practical simplicity. "War Commander Thakmer," Tors said formally, "I believe we need to talk." "Indeed we do," Thakmer replied, his voice carrying barely controlled rage. "You fight without honor using deception and tricks instead of honest combat. Your victories are meaningless." Tors smiled slightly, and there was something cold in the expression. "My victories are keeping you from conquering the galaxy. That makes them very meaningful to me." "You have won a few skirmishes through trickery," Thakmer said dismissively. "But I still have 200 ships against your 47. When I choose to end this charade, your fleet will be annihilated." "You're welcome to try," Tors replied calmly. "But before you do, I think you should understand exactly what kind of enemy you're facing." She gestured to something off-screen, and the display split to show multiple views of the battlefield. Thakmer found himself looking at scenes of his captured ships, his imprisoned crews, and the wreckage of vessels that had been disabled by human weapons. "For the past 5 years, you've been studying galactic military doctrine," Tors continued. "You learned how every species deploys their forces, how they respond to threats, how they conduct warfare in space. You planned this entire invasion around that knowledge." Thakmer said nothing, but his scaled features betrayed his growing unease. "What you didn't study," Tors said, "was human military history. You assumed that our tactics would be similar to other galactic powers, just less sophisticated. That was a fatal error." The display changed to show what appeared to be historical footage from Earth. Images of ancient battles, siege warfare, guerrilla tactics, and asymmetric conflicts that had shaped human military thinking for millennia. "Humans spent 10,000 years learning how to fight and win when we were outnumbered, outgunned, and technologically inferior," Tors explained. "We developed tactics that your species has never encountered because no other galactic power needed to learn them." "Primitive tactics," Thakmer said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Effective tactics," Tors corrected. "You came here expecting to fight a conventional space battle against conventional opponents. Instead, you're fighting a species that learned warfare in the only environment where conventional tactics meant certain death, our own planet." Thakmer studied the images on the screen, trying to understand the implications of what Tors was showing him. The humans had indeed developed forms of warfare that were unknown in galactic military doctrine, but surely superior technology could overcome such primitive approaches. You still cannot match our firepower, he said finally. When my remaining ships attack in full force, your tricks will not save you. You're right, Tors agreed. In a straight fight, your remaining ships would probably destroy my fleet. But War Commander, when have we given you a straight fight? Before Thakmer could respond, alarms began sounding throughout his flagship. Officers started shouting reports from their stations, and the tactical displays began showing something that made his blood run cold. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the fleet, his sensor operator called out. Unknown origin, but the readings are off the charts. What kind of energy signatures? Thakmer demanded. It appears to be antimatter containment fluctuations, but that's impossible. Our antimatter systems are fully stable. Tor's image on the screen smiled wider. I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate. While you've been studying our conversation, my people have been busy implementing the final phase of our strategy. What have you done? Thakmer's voice was barely controlled fury. We've introduced a small modification to your ship's antimatter containment systems, Tors explained casually. Nothing dramatic, just a minor adjustment to the magnetic field generators that will cause catastrophic containment failure in approximately 10 minutes. Thakmer's eyes widened with shock and disbelief. That's impossible. Our ships are protected by sophisticated security systems. You cannot access our internal systems remotely. You're correct, Tors agreed. We can't access your systems remotely, but we didn't need to. The display changed to show footage of human engineering teams working on the Draconian ships that had been captured earlier. The images clearly showed humans installing small devices throughout the captured vessel's critical systems. Every ship you've lost today was carefully prepared before being abandoned for your forces to recover, Tors explained. Our engineers installed quantum resonance transmitters in their antimatter containment systems. These transmitters have been broadcasting adjustment signals to every Draconian ship within range. Thakmer felt a chill of absolute terror. The humans hadn't just been winning individual engagements. They had been systematically sabotaging his entire fleet while making it appear that they were losing ships to his forces. This is monstrous, he whispered. This is warfare, Tors replied coldly. The kind of warfare that humans learned when survival depended on being smarter than our enemies, not stronger. Our engineers can reverse the modifications, Thakmer said desperately. We still have time. No, you don't, Tors interrupted. The modifications are designed to appear as routine maintenance upgrades. Your engineers would need days to identify and reverse all the changes, and you have less than 10 minutes before the first containment failures begin. Thakmer stared at the tactical displays showing his remaining fleet. 200 ships, each one a masterpiece of Draconian military engineering, all of them now ticking time bombs that would destroy themselves unless he found a solution in the next few minutes. What do you want? He asked finally. Unconditional surrender, Tors said simply. All Draconian forces stand down immediately. All captured territory is returned to Galactic authority. All invasion fleets withdraw to Draconian space and remain there. And if I refuse? Then in 8 minutes, your entire fleet suffers simultaneous antimatter containment failure. 200 ships and their crews become radioactive debris scattered across this star system. Thakmer looked around his bridge at the faces of officers who had served with distinction in dozens of campaigns. These were experienced warriors who had never known defeat, and now they were facing death by sabotage rather than honorable combat. You would murder thousands of prisoners? He asked. The prisoners we've taken are perfectly safe, Tors replied. They're being held on platforms outside the blast radius. It's only the ships that are in danger. This is not how civilized species conduct warfare, Thakmer protested. Tor's expression hardened. You came here to conquer and enslave entire civilizations. You launched simultaneous attacks on 17 different systems, targeting civilian populations along with military installations. Don't lecture me about civilized warfare. She leaned forward slightly. The difference between us, War Commander, is that we're fighting to defend our homes while you're fighting to expand your empire. That makes us more desperate, more creative, and much more dangerous than you anticipated. Thakmer closed his eyes, trying to think of any possible alternative to surrender. His military training included scenarios for nearly every conceivable situation, but none of his instructors had prepared him for an enemy that could turn captured ships into weapons against their own fleet. 6 minutes, Tors announced helpfully. "If I surrender," Thakmer said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that you'll reverse the sabotage?" "You have my word as an officer and the backing of the Galactic Council," Tors replied. "Surrender now and your crews live. Continue fighting and they die along with their ships." Thakmer looked at his tactical advisor, seeking some alternative, some strategy that might yet salvage victory from this disaster. But Krester's expression told him everything he needed to know. There was no military solution to their current situation. "War Commander," his communications officer called out urgently, "we're receiving surrender requests from ships throughout the fleet. The crews have heard about the antimatter situation and are requesting permission to abandon ship." 5 minutes, Tors said. Thakmer straightened to his full height, trying to maintain some dignity in defeat. "I, War Commander Thakmer of the Draconian Empire, hereby surrender all forces under my command to the Galactic Defense Force. We request immediate assistance with our antimatter containment crisis." Tors nodded with satisfaction. "Surrender accepted. Human engineering teams are already en route to assist with containment stabilization. Please have your crews stand down all weapons and prepare to receive boarding parties." As the transmission ended, Thakmer slumped in his command chair, trying to process the magnitude of his defeat. The Draconian Empire had sent its finest fleet to conquer the galaxy, and they had been utterly defeated by a species that most galactic powers considered primitive barbarians. "Sir," Krester said quietly, "how did we underestimate them so completely?" Thakmer was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Tor's explanation of human military history. "We studied their technology and assumed their tactics would be similarly primitive," he said finally. "We never considered that a species might develop sophisticated military doctrine while remaining technologically inferior." "What do we tell the Empire?" Krester asked. Thakmer looked at the tactical display showing human ships moving to assist with the antimatter crisis that had never actually existed. The humans had created the perfect illusion of impending disaster, forcing him to surrender without firing a single shot in the final engagement. "We tell them the truth," he said grimly, "that we have encountered an enemy unlike anything the galaxy has seen before, and that any future conflicts with humanity will require a complete rethinking of our approach to warfare." As human engineering teams began boarding Draconian ships to assist with containment problems that would mysteriously resolve themselves, Thakmer found himself wondering how many other aspects of human military capability the galaxy had underestimated. The humans had just proven that technological superiority meant nothing against tactical innovation and strategic thinking. More importantly, they had demonstrated that being underestimated could be the greatest weapon of all. For the first time in his military career, Thakmer understood what it meant to be outfought by a supposedly inferior enemy. It was a lesson he would never forget. 6 months after the Battle of the Asteroid Fields, Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of the Galactic Council chambers with a confidence she had never felt before. The same alien delegates who had once dismissed Earth's contributions now stepped aside respectfully as she passed, and conversations often paused when humans entered a room. The transformation had been remarkable and swift. News of Admiral Tor's victory over the Draconian Armada had spread throughout the galaxy within days, carried by the very communication networks that the Draconians had tried to destroy. The story grew in the telling, but the basic facts remained undeniable. Earth's small fleet had defeated a vastly superior invasion force through tactical brilliance and unconventional warfare. "Ambassador Chen," called out Counselor Vexter as she entered the main chamber. The Zephyrian's tone was respectful now, completely different from the condescending politeness he had shown before the crisis. "I trust you received our proposal for the Joint Defense Initiative." "I did," Sarah replied smoothly. "Admiral Tors is reviewing the technical specifications, but I believe Earth will be very interested in contributing to galactic security." It was a diplomatic way of saying that half the galaxy was now desperate to learn human military tactics, and Earth was in a position to negotiate very favorable terms for sharing that knowledge. "Excellent," Vexter said, with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. Your species' approach to asymmetric warfare has opened entirely new fields of strategic thinking. Sarah smiled politely and continued to her seat, noting how the dynamic in the chamber had changed. Where Earth's representatives had once sat in an isolated corner, often ignored during important discussions, they now occupied a position of honor near the center of the room. Other delegates actively sought their opinions, and military briefings regularly included requests for the human perspective on tactical problems. "The session will now come to order," announced the council president, her melodic Centaurian voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Today's agenda includes a report on the rehabilitation of captured Draconian personnel and updates on the defensive upgrades being implemented throughout council space." Sarah settled back to listen as various delegates reported on the aftermath of the invasion attempt. Over 2,000 Draconian prisoners were being held on secure facilities throughout the galaxy, and their interrogation had revealed the scope of their empire's aggressive expansion plans. The invasion of council space had been just the first phase of a much larger conquest strategy. "The interrogations have been enlightening," reported Commander Thane of the Altarian Navy. His blue-skinned features carried a grim expression as he addressed the assembly. "The Draconian Empire has been planning galactic conquest for decades. They've studied our military doctrines, identified our weaknesses, and prepared countermeasures for every defensive strategy we might employ." "Every strategy except human tactics," added Delegate K.R.R. Shaw with what Sarah recognized as irony. The insectoid being's earlier dismissiveness toward human capabilities had been replaced by something approaching awe. "Indeed," Thane continued, "War Commander Thakmer has been surprisingly cooperative during his debriefing sessions. He seems genuinely interested in understanding how his forces were defeated so decisively." Sarah wasn't surprised. Tors had mentioned that the captured Draconian commander had requested multiple meetings to discuss human military philosophy. Apparently, being outmaneuvered so completely had shattered many of his assumptions about warfare and left him genuinely curious about alternative approaches to tactical problems. "What has he learned?" asked the Centaurian president. "That technological superiority is meaningless without tactical flexibility," Thane replied. His exact words were that humans fight like a prey species that learn to think like predators while maintaining the survival instincts of the hunted. Several delegates made sounds that Sarah had learned to recognize as thoughtful consideration. It was an apt description, she thought. Humans had indeed developed their military doctrine from a position of weakness, learning to overcome superior enemies through intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to use any advantage available. "The Draconian prisoners have also provided valuable intelligence about their empire's structure and capabilities," Thane continued. "We now know the locations of their major military bases, their industrial centers, and their primary supply lines." "Are they planning any retaliation for their defeat here?" asked Vexter. "According to Thakmer, no," Thane replied. "The defeat of their primary invasion force has caused significant political upheaval within the Draconian hierarchy. Several military commanders have been executed for incompetence, and the current leadership appears to be reconsidering their expansion policies." Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease at that news. The galaxy was safer with the Draconian threat neutralized, but she knew that empires rarely abandoned their aggressive ambitions permanently. More likely, they would spend the next few years studying human tactics and developing countermeasures. "Speaking of human tactics," the president said, turning toward Sarah's section, "I believe Admiral Tors has some announcements regarding Earth's military cooperation initiatives." Admiral Tors stood up with the measured confidence that had become her trademark since the battle. At 65, she looked every inch the combat veteran, and her presence commanded immediate attention throughout the chamber. "Distinguished delegates," she began, "Earth has reviewed the numerous requests for tactical consultation and training cooperation we've received over the past months. We're pleased to announce the establishment of the Galactic Defense Academy, which will be jointly operated by Earth's military command and interested council members." A murmur of excitement rippled through the chamber. The Academy represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a formal institution dedicated to teaching the unconventional warfare techniques that had proven so effective against the Draconians. "The Academy will focus on asymmetric tactics, psychological warfare, resource improvisation, and what we call battlefield innovation, Tors continued. We'll also be sharing our historical military archives, which contain records of tactical solutions to problems that most galactic powers have never needed to consider. What kind of problems? Asked Delegate K.R.R. Shaw. Tors smiled with the expression of someone who had found her calling. How to fight when outnumbered 10-1. How to win battles using equipment that's 100 years behind your enemy's technology. How to turn civilian infrastructure into military assets. How to make your enemy's strengths work against them. These are all situations that Council forces have never faced, observed Vexter. Exactly, Tors replied. Which is why you were so vulnerable to an enemy that had studied your standard approaches. Human military doctrine assumes that you'll always be fighting someone stronger, faster, and better equipped. Our entire tactical philosophy is built around overcoming those disadvantages. Sarah watched as delegates throughout the chamber began discussing the implications among themselves. The Academy represented more than just military cooperation. It was a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization thought about warfare and defense. There is one condition for participating in the Academy program, Tors continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. All participating species must agree to a mutual defense compact. The techniques we'll be teaching are extremely effective, but they could also be misused by aggressive powers. You want to ensure that human military knowledge isn't used against Council members, the President observed. We want to ensure that it's only used defensively, Tors clarified. The galaxy has seen what happens when aggressive empires build their strategies around conquest. Human tactics are designed to stop such ambitions, not enable them. Several delegates began speaking at once, all eager to express their species' interest in joining the Defense Compact and gaining access to human military training. Sarah listened to the discussions with a sense of amazement at how completely Earth's position had changed. 6 months ago, they had been tolerated as a minor member of galactic civilization, useful for raw materials and manual labor, but not capable of contributing to serious military or political decisions. Now they were being asked to lead the galaxy's defense against future threats. Ambassador Chen, the President called out, does Earth have any other announcements regarding your expanded role in galactic affairs? Sarah stood up, feeling the weight of dozens of alien gazes focused on her. Earth is honored to contribute to galactic security, she said formally. However, we want to make one thing very clear to everyone present. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives of species that controlled dozens of star systems and possessed technology that humans were still trying to understand. For 15 years, Earth has been treated as a junior partner in galactic civilization, she continued. We were told that our ships were obsolete, our weapons primitive, our tactics outdated. We accepted that assessment because we were new to galactic society and wanted to learn from more experienced powers. The chamber had fallen completely silent. Sarah could sense the tension in the room as delegates realized she was addressing the systematic condescension that Earth had endured since joining the Council. But the Battle of the Asteroid Fields proved something important, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all. The Draconians planned their invasion around the assumption that humans were militarily insignificant. That assumption cost them their entire fleet. She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Earth doesn't want to be feared the way the galaxy feared the Draconians, but we do want respect. We want to be treated as equals in galactic affairs, not as primitive barbarians who occasionally stumble onto useful ideas. You have it, Vexter said immediately. Any species capable of defeating a force 3 times their size through tactical brilliance alone has earned the respect of every military power in the galaxy. More than respect, added Delegate K.R.R. Shaw. You've earned our gratitude and our recognition that technological advancement doesn't necessarily correlate with tactical sophistication. Sarah nodded graciously, but she wasn't finished. Earth also wants to make sure that the galaxy learns the right lessons from our victory. We didn't defeat the Draconians because humans are inherently superior warriors. We defeated them because we approached the problem differently than anyone expected. What's the difference? Asked Thane. Innovation, Sarah replied simply. Humans developed our military doctrine through necessity, fighting enemies who were stronger and better equipped. We learned to win through creativity, adaptability, and the willingness to abandon conventional approaches when they weren't working. She gestured toward Tors. Admiral Tors didn't win by following established galactic military doctrine. She won by ignoring it completely and implementing strategies that no other species had considered. That kind of thinking can't be taught through technical manuals or tactical simulations. Then how can it be taught? The president asked. Tors stepped forward to answer. Through experience, through failure, through being forced to solve problems that have no obvious solutions. She looked around the chamber with a slight smile. In other words, through the kind of challenges that Earth has been facing since we joined galactic society. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she realized what Tors was suggesting. Earth's experience as the galaxy's underdogs hadn't been a disadvantage. It had been the perfect preparation for facing an enemy.